Thank you very much, Chiara Baldini. Did I pronounce that right?
Yes,
From southern Italy. Is that correct?
Central Italy from Tuscany.
From Tuscany. You're a PhD scholar, a raver, and a DJ. I wish I could title myself like that. And you curated the world's biggest psychedelic festival, the Boom Festival or the cultural section in it, in the Boom Festival in Portugal for 13 years. And at the moment, you're studying stuff that has to do with trance and uh, perhaps retaking some parts of history. Or I'm not sure that's exactly what you're studying. What exactly are you studying?
So, yeah, thank you for inviting me. Good to see you. And yeah, I've been studying for 20 years, more or less, like trying to understand how in Southern Europe, especially in the Mediterranean area, people have been using techniques to induce modified states of consciousness. Because I was attending festivals, they were really strong transformational experiences, not just on an individual level, but also at a collective level. Like this bond that is created and the sharing of this collective experience of a modified state of consciousness
Mhm,
was full of potential. And I was wondering, like, how did we get here? Is this something new? Is it a new way of doing something old?
mhm.
So I started in a very spontaneous way looking for books that would lead me in that direction. So I became a scholar on this much later. I've been doing a lot of this research on my own until now. So mystery religions, the cult of Dionysus, the mysteries of Eleusis, different techniques to get high,
Yeah.
let's say. Back in the day, how did we do it?
Yeah. So actually, let me just interrupt myself here because there was one thing that I forgot to say about you when I just introduced you here, and that is that you have an online course now at the Advaya platform. So just to everybody, you can go and check out Chiara's course about exactly what it's about.
So actually, now that I have two, one is about Dionysus in 6 classes. It's a really deep dive in everything
Wow.
Dionysian. And then the one that I just uploaded is on the Minoans, a possible pre-patriarchal culture on the island of Crete in the Mediterranean again.
Badass. Cool. So I just wanted to get that in the beginning of this video, so as many of, as possible sees it. Back to modified states of consciousness. So you basically started as a raver doing techno and DJing and these sort of things, and then you went from there to studying altered states of consciousness in Southern European or sort of the Hellenic world history. Is that correct?
So, yeah, Boom Festival, the festival I worked for many years, is a psytrance. So I have to
Mm-hmm.
correct you. It's not techno, it's
Okay.
psytrance. It's another style. I was not DJing that style. I was playing other music. But yes, going from festivals, I started wondering, did we dance together in the past? Did we get high drinking special brews in the past? What kind of deities were related to these kind of practices? What kind of mythologies? How were the worshippers of these practices seen by culture at large? Was
Mm-hmm.
there even a sort of influence of these values that were amplified with these practices? And we can speak about this as these
Mm-hmm.
techniques to induce modified states of consciousness are like
Mm-hmm.
amplifiers. But
Mm-hmm.
so I was wondering,
Okay.
how do these values that are amplified through these techniques, did they influence ancient politics? Can we trace some influences of these values into the political sphere? So these were the
Mm-hmm.
questions.
And when you pose that question, my intuition would be that your answer is probably yes, there is an influence in the political sphere in the antique world. So, what was the influence then
So
of the?
I think my answer would be looks like it. It looks
Okay,
like
okay.
it.
All
We
right.
can never.
I like your scholarly sobriety.
Yes. So yeah, so different, actually, different kinds of influences, because it looks like even the famous Athenian democracy
Mhm,
that the Western culture prides itself, it's the first, it's the best. We don't know if it was the first or even the best. It was just a form of democracy.
mhm,
Decolonial studies are bringing us to this
mhm,
awareness that maybe was not the first and not even the best, because also it was a very patriarchal form of democracy, because it was just for a specific kind of male, not even
mhm,
all men, but some
mhm,
men, the citizens men. But it seems like this idea of equality, this idea of having a vote, the different people without a hierarchical structure of control and a hierarchical form of authority, it seems like these kind of values were already present and experienced and embodied in Dionysian rituals. Because
okay.
Dionysian rituals, like every other form of mystery religion, which were the more like we would say now the shamanic religious experiences of the Greeks. So these rituals were open to everyone, including
Mhm,
women who often had authority positions. They could initiate men, for example, and slaves.
mhm,
Big, big difference than the patriarchal, traditions of the Greeks. Slaves and immigrants.
okay.
And so, yeah, mysteries of Eleusis, everyone could participate. So they were very egalitarian structures, and they
Mhm,
were, especially the associations organizing the rituals of Dionysus, they were private associations, and they functioned with their own rules. And
mhm,
these rules were more egalitarian than the rules of the rest of the society. So it seems that thanks to these associations, that were many, and I'm talking about the 5th century BC, the
mhm,
time of classical Greece before the Hellenistic times, that they formed enough critical mass, let's say, we would say
mhm,
now,
mhm,
to help with the toppling and the substitution of authoritarian or oligarchic regimes that were the
mhm.
norm, being inherited from the Bronze
Yeah.
Age. So,
Mhm,
yeah, looks like the Dionysian people had an influence there. And then it looks also like this was the reverse kind of influence that in the 2nd century BC in Rome, when the cult of
mhm,
Dionysus was imported as Dionysus became Bacchus and the
mhm,
rituals became the Bacchanalia,
mhm,
again, it was a really grassroots, we would say, kind of movement.
mhm,
Everyone could participate. It was an amount of people that were bonded together through the belief in the kind of values
mhm,
that were contrary to the value system of very patriarchal, very misogynist, very hierarchical Roman culture.
mhm.
Roman
Yeah.
culture is already like peak patriarchy.
Mhm,
So, these dancing freaks, and you couldn't distinguish males from females. We have all of these clues in this speech
mhm.
by this consul that spoke to the General Assembly of Rome to find reasons to repress the cult of Bacchus because
Okay.
it was just socially destabilizing.
Okay. And it represented also effeminized men, or
Yeah, because the Dionysus is a queer god. He's
yeah,
the queer god of the West. I'm sure in the North there is other versions, but in the
yeah,
South there is Dionysus. There is also
yeah.
Fufluns. There is also vegetation god similar to Dionysus in the Etruscan
Hmm.
civilization, coming from here, where I am now
Yeah.
in Tuscany. So, yeah, these are queer gods. They are
Yeah,
not men or women. They're both.
yeah,
They function as these connectors between the opposites.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
for sure,
Um,
for patriarchal societies, this was challenging.
yeah. I kind of believe that most of these kind of gods almost have queerness as inherent potential inside them somehow. But that's a kind of a different story, at least from the polytheistic religions that I'm mostly familiar with, which is the Nordic and the Yoruba. Weirdly, very different things. But I think and that's perhaps we can talk about that. But I think this is super interesting. Uh, so because obviously, like a society is always very composite, and it has tensions inside it, and there will be oppositions and different positions that will be playing out. And here you're outlining the Bacchanalian or Dionysian space as a counterpoint to a, for instance, Greco-Roman patriarchalism. Um, and modified states of consciousness, does that have then a specific like trance or ecstasy? I'm not sure what words you prefer using. Does that then, well, obviously we know that it had a role in the Dionysian cult. How would that then be induced? Would it be ritually induced? Would it be induced through psychedelic substances, intaking of some sort, or what do we know about that?
So, specifically to the cult of Dionysus, we know that they were dancing on repetitive beats.
Yeah.
So they had this instrument that is the frame drum, that is the classic shamanic drum that has different sizes in the Mediterranean area. And this is like already enough to induce an altered state in a group of people. So they knew they were very knowledgeable about rhythm patterns that can
Yeah.
induce a trance state. These traditions were coming, we don't even know from how long before. They were not Greek, they didn't invent them. It was just a Greek adaptation of something that was probably coming from the Neolithic, even the Paleolithic. And it was uninterrupted. These strong interruptions of these traditions only come with Christianity. So they were experts of trance music making, and they were experts of trance music dancing. So the music, the dance, the movements, the collectivity of it, the being together in unison and moving in unison, and also using certain cries, certain words that were uttered, also to increase this synchronization of the group of people. And Dionysus is seen as the god who comes. This is one of his epithets, one of his
Yeah.
names, because he comes in the form of an energy that gets possession of the bodies of the people. So you would be, once you start to get high, you would feel the power of Dionysus coming inside you. It would be described as possession by Dionysus. But also there's other techniques. For example, yes, the drinking of psychotropic brews, even if it was wine, it was not our wine that we drink, for lunch or dinner. This is ceremonial wine, and ceremonial wine was always spiked with more stuff. And only now we're starting to figure out through archaeochemistry what was in these drinks. These were complex recipes, and they were very different in different places, in different times, by the different associations. But it was not just being drunk, it was also being high. And these theories, yeah, just now we are
Yeah.
figuring out it was a mix of different ingredients, both for palatability, but also for the psychotropic effects.
Yeah.
So dancing, singing, drinking, spiked brews, let's say,
Yeah.
and sexuality, because also group sexuality is a technique to induce an altered state of consciousness.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
these references to sexuality, again, can come from way back into the Neolithic, Paleolithic times of, you know, s- fertility rituals. sex magic to propitiate the fertility of the land, but maybe
Yeah,
also something connected to the group intention. So these are some of the techniques.
yeah, and obviously, like in societies that aren't, I don't know, post-Victorian brutes, sex is a tool that can be used to ritually. I mean, there are even Christian sects who've been doing that. Another instrument that I've been that I just thinking about is that called a sistrum? A sistrum, like a small
Sistrum.
rattle.
Sistrum comes from Egypt. So
Okay.
that's an Egyptian tradition, especially Isis, the goddess.
Yeah.
So apparently, the sistrum, there is this frame, and then there is this
Yeah.
metal lines, and then on the metal there is I
Yeah.
wouldn't know how to describe them, little plates made of
Yeah. That
um,
rattling
that
elements. Yeah.
rattles. And this, from what I remember, it symbolized the flow of existence. So
Yeah.
by using it, you help existence to keep on flowing, which means
Yeah.
there's death and there's rebirth, and then there's death and then change and rebirth and change and death and rebirth. It's all about this constant transformation and movement. And so it was a way to propitiate the continuation of this movement, which
Ah.
would allow the rebirth of plants in
Oh
spring,
wow.
and allow people to have children and animals to have more animals.
Yeah. Yeah.
So all of
Fertility.
these
Yeah.
cycles of life would be propitiated through this instrument.
Yeah, awesome. I was just thinking about it because rattles are often found together with also as a shamanic instrument, and a sistrum is basically a kind of rattle. Um, yeah, and I there could be almost a kind of a sensory deprivation to that sound, that it muddles up the soundscape by kind of scrambling sound basically. But this historic background or history of religion's background of trance in the Mediterranean area, is that something that can be like religiously recovered today? Like one thing is that like you've been doing DJing and you can do psytrance and you can perhaps create a an experience of trance, but I would say there's a difference between having an experience of trance and that Dionysus actually comes and is there. Of course, those two things can float some into each other, but if you have an actual possession invocation technique, like these people had, that was like a whole ritual technology probably that included all kinds of things, including these sexual behaviors and these sort of things. Can these things be retaken again? Can they be recovered again? Or would you say that, well, psytrance raving is doing that? Or what would you say?
Yeah, now you're touching a delicate point for me, because since I started sharing about these stories, I have more and more people asking me, can we do this? Do you know of people doing this? Can we go on the mountains and do it like the women of Dionysus? And I don't know what to think about like modern efforts to rebuild something that is gone, and it's hard to even know what they were doing exactly, because we don't have a huge amount of information. So anyway, it's going to be a very faint interpretation of what that was
Mm,
about for real. So I actually really liked festivals in a way that specific kinds of festivals that, of course, are not commercial, they're not mainstream. So there's not all of these consumeristic, um, capitalistic use, or influence on the festival itself. It's a spontaneous way to redo those things that is even unconscious to a certain degree. I think that only from the 60s on, we were able to dance freely with our bodies. Before the 60s, people had to dance in couples, and everything was very ordered and structured, and you had to move in a certain way. And only after the 60s, we rediscovered what it means to just let your body express itself in the ways it wants. So automatically, it was almost like magically, people started gathering and dancing. And first it was rock music, and we have Woodstock, and then other forms of music took over from the 80s on. So it was like humanity, especially in the West, regaining this awareness, this consciousness, like, okay, this is what we want to do, this is what we like to do, and there must be something about it. And there is the political dimension, there is the sacred dimension. Then, yes, you also have people doing Dionysian festivals here and there, small groups, maybe taking psychedelics, maybe holding space for each other to go as far as they can in a trance state. And that also happens. And okay, but they're very modern reconstructions. I don't know how, let's not have an illusion that we can go very close to what they were doing, because it's different. Also the
I,
mind, because our
yeah,
minds are different.
yeah, totally, totally. No, I'm also not so much. I'm not so interested in doing the same. What I was interested in is invoking Dionysus, and which, and like actually getting Dionysus to come. That was kind of my thinking, and like, but let me just, because you're saying something that I think is really interesting here about dance as something that's structured or free, and like in the trance cult that I'm familiar with, dance is actually very structured. Like you get into deep trance, and then what you actually have is part of the manifestation of the deity, like say Dionysus, or uh, is that a priest, a human priest, will actually demonstrate for the possessed human, thereby also for the deity, how to manifest as a legitimate, say, Dionysus in a human setting. So there's a they call that doctrination. So the deity is being taught how to move in that way, and there are probably also elements of that overall thing that are very free or improvised, or somewhat free and improvised. And there's certainly elements that come through as very bacchanalian, also erotic and these sort of things. But I think there's an interesting sort of interplay between what is structured and what does that do, and what is improvised and free and what does that do. Because
Mm.
yeah, do you have any thoughts of on what I'm saying here?
Yeah, the thing with Dionysian rituals and how they manifest in this spontaneous way in festivals, for example, it's this thing of like big groups of people. It's
Yeah,
not an
yeah,
individual healing of someone. It's something. It's an energy that takes possession of a whole crowd.
yeah.
So that's why, for example, we have Joseph Campbell, that is a comparative mythologist
Uh,
from the US, studying different mythologies. He happened to go to a Grateful Dead concert back
okay,
in the, I don't know if it was the 70s or something like that.
great.
And so we have his description of what he saw there, and he says that that was a Dionysian ritual, because was seeing this connection between the people playing the instruments, now the musicians, and how that was affecting the crowd, and how everyone was into the same wave of movement and of feeling together, and
Yeah,
how this was like this magmatic trance thing, where everything and everyone was together,
yeah,
and yeah, in
yeah.
intensity and enthusiasm. So yeah, there is this component of the togetherness and of the group.
yeah,
So to have also structured movement, it depends, I guess, like
yeah,
today would not be possible in those contexts.
yeah,
But then again, also the energy of Jim Morrison or
mm,
Mick Jagger, with their androgynous
yeah, yeah,
energy
yeah,
and this sexual way to raise the enthusiasm of the
yeah,
people. So also that element plays
yeah,
into modern
mhm,
versions that are not
yeah.
usually codified, officially
Mm.
codified as Dionysian.
I saw a scene in a recent movie about Elvis Presley, and it was made by the I forgot the name of this filmmaker. He was the one who made the Forbidden, Strictly Ballroom, and Moulin Rouge, and anyway, that guy. I'm probably going to put him on screen now, but but he made a movie about Elvis Presley
Baz
recently.
Luhrmann.
Yes, Baz Luhrmann, exactly. Um, and there was this scene where I felt that he was narrating Elvis's breakthrough as basically a manifestation of Dionysus. That this weirdly kind, and he actually describes him in a queer terms, and he was like makeup around his eyes, and he was standing in a pink suit and being a kind of skinny little weird little boy there, and then all of a sudden this power just enters him, and it makes the women go bananas. And so there's that. And I mean, when I saw that, it actually changed my perception of Elvis, because I was always a little bit like, man, he wasn't nearly as cool as Little Richard, but I really kind of felt that a story of a Dionysian spirit in the 20th century was being put into place by Baz Luhrmann there.
Yeah,
So anyway, that was just expanding a little bit on your your.
yeah,
I'm sure Jim Morrison probably a step down the line from that.
yeah.
Um,
Elvis Presley opened the door for
yeah,
all of these other people to come after, for sure.
yeah. I also think some specific thing about Elvis is that just kind of so messed with the heads of these 1960s North Americans was that he was kind of a black man. He just looked like a white man. And that was just very, very kind of pulling the rug from under their cognitive perception of the world. Anyway, um, what about stuff like you're from Italy? What about stuff like the Taranta from southern Italy? I've always been so fascinated and impressed by that stuff. Couldn't that be used for ritual purpose?
Yes, and in a way it is because there's different versions of that ritual.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a group of male musicians and a woman inside, the one that claims to be possessed by the spirit of the spider or being bitten by the
Mm-hmm.
spider, La Taranta. There is also
Mm-hmm.
tarantula. That's the
Yeah.
connection with the words. And so she dances, and she's also possessed at some point through this trance-like
Mm-hmm.
music, and this trance state heals her from being bitten by this spider. But it could also be a metaphor for women just going crazy, being repressed under patriarchy for so long. And this is
Mm-hmm.
another version of the so-called hysterical woman, but there's nothing wrong with her per se. It's just the accumulation of repressed energy, sexuality, etc., or being abused, etc. So there's that version that maybe lasted until, I don't know, the 50s, the 60s,
Mm-hmm.
because there is some video, even black and white, and I think it was De Martino, this anthropologist, talking about it. And yes, it could be something connected to Dionysian or Bacchic rituals because of the
Mm-hmm.
music
Mm-hmm.
and this trance state.
mm,
Then there is this collective ways of redoing it, and there is the tarantella and these other
mm,
bigger events, more modern, where a lot of people are dancing. Structured and not structured, because also
mm,
tarantella is a specific way to dance. And so these are still happening. And
mm,
if you go in the south, like Puglia, especially, you have in the summer these big parties. It's like big parties in the middle of the main square of the town. It's not like a festival location somewhere, but in the towns.
mm,
And they last all night and they can be very wild.
mm,
So there's also that side. It's
mm,
still happening, slightly different, but yeah, the traditions of the people, the simple people, the normal people, as opposed to
mm,
the elite, I'm saying, continuing to find ways to gather and to get high together and to be
mm.
regenerated by that kind of experience.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if we spoke about this when we met in Lisboa, but I've always thought that very there's a possible compatibility between the Taranta traditions and specific Norwegian dance and music traditions that are very animist. They're very like you you go and you make a pact with specific spirit about charging your violin in a specific way. So it becomes, so you tune it in what's called a troll tuning, like a spirit tuning, and then that can entrance people when you play it like that. And the capacity to make trancing music then is something that you get through ritual engagement with. And having listened to the Taranta, to my ears, it sounds similar to
Mm.
Gnawa from
Ah,
North
yeah,
Africa.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Also the rattling instruments and
Mm,
these sort of things.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, let me just pivot to another question here because, like, you've been working on altered states of or modified states of consciousness, and perhaps also on the use of psychotropic substances and these sort of things. Today, there is this weird interface growing that's sometimes called the alt right or the new age to alt right pipeline, or the woo to Q, or the woo anon, and they have all these different names for it. And in that space, you sometimes find that that these hallucinogenic element or psychedelic element that we used to associate very much with the 1970s and the hippie movement and the political left, the cultural left, that is suddenly moving into the cultural right and becoming an amplifier, as you probably say it in the right wing. Can you share some of your thoughts on the outline of what's happening there and why?
So, yes, I've been thinking about this for some time, and there has been some research put into this and some essays written about this. And so, at the base of what I'm understanding is that, let's talk about psychedelics now.
Hmm.
Psychedelics are non specific amplifiers. So,
Yeah.
this is a definition by Stanislav Grof, this psych- psychologist, I think, from the Czech Republic, a big person, big figure in the psychedelic movement, especially in the 80s, 90s. So this definition let us understand that it's about the values that
Hmm.
we have as an individual or a group that get amplified. So
Hmm.
it's the certain setting which includes a bit of everything, including where you are and who's around you, but also what is
Hmm.
inside you, what is your mindset, what are your beliefs and values.
Hmm.
So until recently, psychedelics were mainly used by people that were resonating with the values of the 60s. This was
Hmm.
was a hippie thing to do, to take psychedelics.
Hmm.
It started within the counterculture movement of the 60s. They were discovered, LSD was discovered by Hoffman already in the 40s, I think.
Mm,
But only in the 60s, they became the drug of the substance or the medicine of the hippies.
mm,
And the substances fueled the movement fueled this use of substances. So there was this widespread belief that if you put LSD, this was like an urban legend, if you put LSD in the water sewage system or the water system of a city and everybody drink that water with LSD, everybody turns into a hippie.
mm.
It's not true. Now
No.
we are figuring out that it's really not true. If you put it in the, let's say hypothetically, in the water system of a right-wing majority kind of place,
Mm,
it would potentiate and it will amplify their beliefs and their values.
mm,
So even the army, if you think about what I just told you about the
mm,
Dionysian techniques, they are
mm,
the same techniques that are used in the army, any army of
mm.
any time. So this synchronized movement, these beats, boom,
Yeah.
boom, of how you march.
Mm,
Drugs have been used by every army, different kind of
mm,
drugs, as an experimentation, as a way for people to push harder and to get disconnected from the reality and just be, accomplishing their mission.
mm,
So many different kinds of drugs have been used in the armies, and you have the same kind of dissolution of individuality into a
mm.
group, and then the will of the group is more important than yours,
Yeah.
of the individual. And you have many resonances, so the same techniques can be used by
Mm,
different kinds of people with different
yeah.
value sets
Mm,
with different results. So now you have more and more right-wing people that love to take psychedelics because
mm,
also it potentiates their productivity, so it also plays into the whole Silicon Valley hyper capitalism,
mm.
and making people better capitalists and more
Yeah.
productive. And microdosing is used for wellness, and but the wellness of who for what is it?
Mm,
It depends. Because also the wellness culture is, for me, it's like a sign that whatever was new age was so devout, or like
mm.
was so denying any political awareness for
Yeah.
so long, even demonizing political awareness for so long,
Yeah.
that now we have wellness culture that is completely that was depoliticized and has been co-opted by the right. And then you have these
Yeah.
retreats with psychedelics that cost thousands of euros. No one can afford them except for the mega rich.
Mm,
So you have this reproduction of the capitalistic system, but within the use of substances that were associated with people that were against
mm.
the capitalistic
Yeah.
system. So it's
And
now.
today, yeah. And today it seems that one thing is that this, I don't know if you could call it inherent capitalism that has been such an important part of the new age space, that now with Donald Trump you have an actual fascism that then steps into place. And I think the British influencer Russell Brand is an interesting example, because he went so far from being this sort of ultra hippie who was sitting there with in lotus position with beanies and incense, and
Mm,
and then he went through COVID, conspiracy theories, endless kind of very, and all of a sudden he's basically, a lackey of Donald Trump, almost, kind of sitting and being his guest at Mar-a-Lago and these sort of things. So it's a very far move, and I feel I've
mm,
seen that play out in 10 years. Do you remember when Russell Brand came out and called for revolution, and everybody on the left wing was like, yes, yes, it's so fucking cool, and then all of a sudden he's like, I don't know,
mm.
hiding and marching or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and getting baptized
Yeah,
in
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. That's
meantime.
kind of a step on the, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever thought he was cool. To tell you the truth, it's very clear he's a womanizer from day one. Then if people didn't want
Well,
to
as a
see that
person who's
side,
not a womanizer, I just want to say I think womanizers are kind of cool.
so anyway, this thing, but we also have to remember, as you know very well, the fact that the Nazis in Germany were also esoteric people and they were
Totally.
using Eastern knowledge from Eastern philosophies and
Mm,
Eastern symbology. So it's more like something that repeats itself than
totally.
something completely new. We had
Mm,
this phase in the counterculture where there was a bit more political awareness because
mm,
part of the countercultural movement was also the political new left
mm,
movement. So, big demonstrations against the war in Iraq for social justice, against
mm,
racism, for gay liberation, women liberation. So all of this part was part also of the what then gave rise to the new age, that was also
mm,
just a critique to Christianity as the only way to God, because
mm,
until
mm,
the 60s Christianity in the West, its different declinations, was the only way to the divine.
mm. Yeah.
So it started a bit like that. Okay, let's see, let's experiment with other
Mm,
spiritualities, and even with astrology and tarot. So
mm,
Western esotericism, it was still somehow connected to this
mm.
political side, and
Yeah.
then slowly in the 80s with the counterculture, no, the conservative backlash, let's say, with
Mm,
Thatcher and Reagan, the music changed
mm,
really suddenly and harshly, and
mm.
so this
But
counterculture split in different sides,
mm,
and the spiritual side was disconnected from the political side.
okay, yeah. So, but let me just mention one aspect that I think has could have a potential from the alt-right perspective in the psychedelic movement, and that is that psychedelics are obviously they're a useful tool for specific cultures used to create modified states of consciousness. But the story about psychedelics or hallucinogenic substances has a tendency to become this sort of mono story, this monolith story that is sometimes sort of pitched to be able to explain everything. So if there's something that's weird in history, then well, somebody probably took acid. If humans became conscious at some point in history, well, there was probably monkeys that ate some mushrooms. If somebody in X religion is eating something at some point, loads of religious ritual where you eat, but then even I don't know, normal Christian communion obviously comes from taking acid, and so it has a tendency to become this unified explanation of everything, and that is something that I think is characteristic of the alt right. That and particularly stories that explain where you have one story that explain everything, but the story is completely veiled. It's completely behind the veils. Saying that Christian communion descent comes from drinking mushroom tea. I haven't seen the research, but my intuition would be, come on, dude. But and that there's a similarity, I think, that in that way of producing a story, similarities to stuff like conspiracy theories, for instance. You have a monolithic story that is behind everything, and it's countercultural. It's a counterculture monolith story behind everything, rather than a complex story with, for instance, high academic integrity. I would say. Am I saying something that that challenges, or maybe you know more about this? Please correct me.
So I want to start with the Christian Mass and the Eucharist. Actually, in the Immortality Key, there is this book we already mentioned by Brian Murarescu. It's a problematic book from my perspective, but it does create a sort of narrative with research around the fact that this early mass wine was also spiked, because also there is all these connections between Jesus and Dionysus, and there's different books talking about this. Mythologically, they're also rebels to the authority. You know, Jesus was a revolutionary. Then Christianity became the institution of patriarchy and of every form of oppression. But originally, Jesus was this revolutionary victim god that is persecuted by the authorities, like Dionysus, like I was telling you in Rome. Dionysus had that fate of being persecuted, and also the Bacchae by Euripides. He is contraposed with this ruler that is an authoritarian, we would say now, right-wing misogynist guy. So they carry this kind of energy, both of them. And so yes, probably it was something more spiked than it became later, what they were drinking. Yeah, it's there's a lot about this. But then in terms of like this one story that then seems like to explain everything, and then we are already bordering with the conspiracy theories. Like conspiracy theories, there's always this nugget of truth, but then there's also like, in the case of psychedelics, they've really been repressed for so long. This is real.
Of course.
Starting from the edict of Theodosius, which was 380, I think, AD. So this is after, this Roman Empire, and this was the decision to make Christianity as the only official religion of the Roman Empire with Theodosius. So this was the destruction of all the temples of the pagan world in the Roman Empire, the destruction of a lot. But of course, it survived. So it does enter into this countercultural space where these practices have to be done hiding from the authorities, especially the religious authorities. Then the religious authorities themselves, they are involved into all kinds of sins. We know that also from literature, from the Middle Ages and stuff. And then it culminates with the witch hunts, that again, it was a kind of culture, a kind of know-how and religious spiritual practices, knowledge of plants and knowledge of properties of plants that are not just medicinal but also ceremonial. Then it gets suppressed again. So this is a real story that keeps on happening. And then the way in which these practices were seen first in our history. So when we get to the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason started to look at all of these superstitions of the past and judge them as non evolved, primitive, simple, or stupid, even. So, this same judgment that we had towards ourselves and our own traditions was projected on the different indigenous cultures that
Yeah.
we meet. So, we also spoke about this in Lisbon, of this act of
Yeah.
self colonization. So, this is something that happened again and again. So now we are in this changing of the narratives about certain practices. So, oh, psychedelics, all of a sudden, they're not anymore like the drugs of the devil, but they are interesting tools that can be used for different interesting practices. So,
Or
yes,
recreationally.
or recreationally, that for me, the recreational use include the therapeutic, the religious. It's the one that includes them all, not that excludes, but that includes them all. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but this thing of it's a real story of repression, but this story then can
Yeah,
be co-opted by different forces now, because everybody wants to be the revolutionary, the ones
yeah, yeah,
who goes against authority and free the people from the chains of authority.
yeah.
But this can also be co-opted by hegemonic forces that want to look like that they are the revolutionaries,
So
but
is it
they're
is
not.
so is it really about counterculture, and what is counterculture? Because like what I feel that we're seeing with the alt right is that the political left wing, a lot of the values that we used to fight very hard for or to press through, like anti-racism and feminism and equality, these sort of issues, they have stepped much closer to the cultural norm, and that part of the cultural space is basically insisting on these values, and that means that they don't feel as countercultural as they felt 15 years ago. Like, and that means that if you want to be countercultural, being an anti-racist isn't, it isn't really so sexy. If you want to be countercultural, actually, then you need to, like, I don't know, uh, think about
Bring
climate
abortion back
denialism.
or
Or,
bring
yeah,
abortion back. Yeah, I mean, this is how the right wing narratives have been playing out and touching a lot of people and managing to convince a lot of people that to still be countercultural, you had to go against all those very hard earned rights that took us fucking
yeah, yeah, yeah.
hundreds of years, or if
But
not
but when
thousands, in
but
order
when
to
those rights become normative, then they are not counterculture anymore. So
listen.
being counterculture, like what I see with friends of mine, is that if you have people who identify very strongly as countercultural, then they just stay on the counterculture train, even though that train is driving right wing now. It used to drive left. They didn't really seem to notice that it's driving the other
So
way.
these discourses are, from my perspective, extremely superficial. It's like the surface of the surface of the surface. Because if you think, or not you, but anyone thinks that having movies with trans actors and then all of a sudden the mermaid is a black woman, and this is nothing. This is still not having a non-patriarchal culture. We are still at the beginning of trying to build a non-patriarchal culture. So when you ask me
Yeah,
what
yeah,
is,
no,
let
yeah.
me
I think
speak,
I
let
disagree with
me
you on
speak,
that.
but let me speak. So when you ask me at the beginning, what is the counterculture? For me, the fundamental aspect is patriarchy, because patriarchy has defined most of our institutions. I'm not saying that everybody was
Mm,
patriarchal, because there were always movements to rebel against
mm.
patriarchal authorities. So this hierarchical, misogynist, blah blah blah.
Just, 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 just a moment. I just had my little boy come. Ah! Sorry, you were in patriarchal,
Yes,
patriarchal misogynist.
yes. So the counterculture is a something, a movement or a culture that goes against certain values that have been the founding values of patriarchy, white supremacy, like all of that. So now it's like what, 6 decades that things have started to change a little bit,
Mm,
just because, okay, women now can study and can pay mortgages and can decide whether they want to have children or not. I am the first woman
mm,
in my lineage that can
mm,
decide whether I can have whether I can have children or not. It's a conscious
mm.
decision. So it's very new. It's very new. If you ask two women, gay people, black people, they know that we are still like
Sorry.
Hello.
Jeg sidder lige og interviewer en muldring.
Halloween is coming.
Yes.
So,
I'm
yeah,
sorry. I'm sorry, Chiara. I just got Halloween crowded by kids.
okay. So, that's why I mean these discourses that says, but now to be counterculture, you have to be right wing because the left wing has already conquered everything and there's no
No, I don't
boundaries
think we.
anymore.
I'm not saying that we've conquered everything. I'm also not saying that there isn't a patriarchy anymore. What I am saying, and what I think, no, let me roll back. What I think you are saying, which is problematic, is that you're making patriarchy into a monolith, and our culture and society are complexes that are filled with oppositions and tensions and different things that just coexist without being aligned, and struggles that are playing out in myriads of different ways because we live in hyper complex societies. Now, what I think is a problem in some feminist narratives is actually saying, well, we are still living inside this monolithic thing called patriarchy, and that defines everything that everything in our life, and it doesn't. It defines a lot. You still find it in many parts of our society, but you also find other stuff. You also find that queerness had been acknowledged in ways that we had never dreamed of. You find that women have increasingly equal rights. You also find, for instance, that a huge demographic segment of heterosexual guys are falling out of the social hierarchy. They're basically dropping out. In the statisticians here call it loser men. If you're a loser man, and which interestingly is a rampantly patriarchal label to give to these guys, they are not acknowledged as being part of structural systems that take certain, that make that defines the flows of power and the symmetries in our society. They are actually blamed for their lack of patriarchal agency in that label, loser men. And I think that acknowledging these complexities is, I think, disacknowledging these complexities is extremely dangerous, because then we allow them to grow without being addressed, without, like, for instance, when people talk today about the crisis in masculinity, there's so many men who are just like becoming weird in their head. They end up in toxic chauvinist worldviews, and the entire alt-right space. Like, I think it's like, in order to basically talk to these people, in order to bring them, then we have to actually understand the complexity of our society, where there are functions that, for instance, create a segment of heterosexual guys who are unsuccessful in society, which is a fact. It's like a statistic fact, and this, I think, is really dangerous to not acknowledge that as a structural, as a power structure in society that we can talk openly about and figure out. So how do we create heterosexual guys who are simultaneously, militant queer feminists or whatever we want them to be, But in order to do that, we have to start by acknowledging the complexity that holds those problems. And I think that with counterculture, it's a little bit the same. Like, I acknowledge that we live in a society that has enormous problems, where, for instance, economic disparity is enormous, and it has not been addressed, and it has not been addressed at all, almost, by the last 20 years of hardcore anti-racism, identitarianism, and feminism. These things have been important, but they have
Hardcore for who? Hardcore for who?
well,
Who
from
says that they are hardcore?
in our well, let me just drop the word hardcore. like I've been on the political left my whole life, and working on in anti-racism, and we thought that was that was something that you had to stand on in a radical way. So that was my use of the word hardcore. But forget that if you want. Like, we're standing in a position now where the counterculture that we're seeing, which is identified with the alt-right. Well, maybe you would disagree with me in this. Like, I see this as a result of the failure of the left to address, for instance, economic disparities. It has not been very much on the agenda for at least.
It's, as again I said, we're just at the beginning. The left didn't address a huge amount of stuff because it's still the beginning of a different kind of society than what we have seen until now. What about the amount of money that is wasted in weapons?
Yeah, absurd. Yeah, absolutely absurd. Yeah.
This is foundational of patriarchy. Since the fucking, sorry, since the Bronze Age, all the resources go in the army so that you are the most powerful state or man or whatever, and it's still the same. So these really big, huge structural issues have not changed at all. That's why for me, to be distracted by the culture wars, because now too much talk about the trance, but or similar issues, I see this more like a pounding of right-wing propaganda that they really do really well to say that this is exaggerated, that this is too much, and now the pendulum needs to go back because it went too far that side. But I'm like, no, which too far? We were just starting to change the culture. It was the beginning of the beginning.
So, what would be your solution model when you look at, say, eco hippies who end up becoming tradwife homesteaders who say Catholic grace before eating their own homegrown turnips and have 7 children and only wear dresses and these sort of, like, how do we, because that is a real cultural movement that is going on today in the counterculture space, or where people identify as counterculture. What, like, and dropping LSD in their water doesn't work, because that's just going to amplify them and they're going to be flipping Amish instead of just trad wives. So, what will be your solution model for how to address that culture
So
problem?
to keep on naming them as counterculture is to play into their propaganda. That's not counterculture because that's patriarchal. If you're still patriarchal, you're not countercultural. So this is where we might disagree. So I know that the right wing calls that counterculture because of like being in this victim position. Everything is so woke now that to be counterculture means to be a trad wife. But no, the counterculture is anti-patriarchal. So if you're a trad wife, you're not countercultural. I don't understand. So yeah, what would be the solution? The solution is what Trump is attacking most. One of the things that he's attacking most, which is education. You need to be educated. Education
Yeah,
is liberation. You
yeah.
need to be educated by independent institutions that really, put
No, I
research,
agree.
independent research at their
Yeah.
core. And this was one of the good things that also was a result of the 1960s, like critical theory, all of that, liberation theory, all the feminist studies everywhere, the dismantling of the concept of objectivity and neutrality to really make everything more complex, to allow underrepresented voices to speak, like indigenous scholars that you know about. So all of this was the juice, like the best part of the 60s. And now it's been dismantled at like with a ferocity that is pointing to how important education is to dismantle system of authoritarian regimes. So yeah,
Amen, sister.
let's all go back to school.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Let's
yeah.
go back to school.
Yeah. No, I totally believe in that. I think and I'm often saying this to people. I think the Nordic folk school model has, which is a decentralized model for for popular education, that created an explosion in empowerment movement in Scandinavia when it broke through in women's
Yeah,
empowerment,
yeah,
workers' land rights movement, co-ownership movement. I think this particular movement should be exported and in so and that could really change something, but and I also I agree with you that like um, that education is really important. I just still feel that we haven't saved the world now, you and I. We haven't found exactly the solution. Like, is that really enough to say educate? Like, I mean, obviously, an undereducated public in North America has paved the way for fascism, and
yes,
fascism is a number of
yes,
parameters. Gender fascism, like uh, and Christian nationalism implemented in schools and so on. Um, and it's so weird to see the things that you and I probably believe in, both of us, being somehow part of the funnel that leads people down there. Like stuff like, you know, nature, spirituality, and having alternative spiritualities, and you know, believing that there's economic powers problems in the world, and I don't know. I don't train yoga
psychedelics.
myself. Yeah, psychedelics. You know, all these things.
Yes, I'm
Wanting
very
to move back
aware.
to the land. These sort of things.
Yes, I'm very aware because I have friends that
Yeah,
start to go, on the conservative side,
yeah.
coming from all of the things that you have mentioned. But yeah, what I see in them is also a lack of political awareness. There's no political awareness. So they are being co opted by the far right. It's like there is a vulnerability, there is a weak point because
Mm,
of this issue of the being the persuadables. I don't know, this
mm,
story came out with Cambridge Analytica, the first social media manipulation campaigns that the right wing started doing, also that then led to
mm,
Brexit and maybe also the first election of Trump, etc.
mm,
Um, what did I want to say? So the persuadables, because the counterculture in the 80s and 90s, especially the hippie
mm,
side of the counterculture, we became apolitical. This was like a
mm.
foundation of our identity that we do
Yeah,
not vote. So
yeah.
if we do not vote, we are automatically more persuadable
Mm,
than those who vote, that have it
mm,
clear why they give the vote to that person or the other person. Those who don't vote, they can be swayed. Okay, so maybe we come into your world, we understand your values, we understand what you believe, and we start creating a messaging that leads you slowly but surely towards the right wing without you
mm,
knowing, because you don't
mm,
have this awareness of what are
mm,
the values and what is the history of the fights
mm,
behind those rights that have been earned, and etc.
mm.
So there is this lack of political awareness that I would also love to bring back to the hippies.
Mm.
That would be one of
Yeah.
the possible solutions.
I'm gonna say I'm also seeing people who are very politically conscious and who used to be like in the same activist groups as me, but who are basically on their way down that rabbit hole, and like I would say not labeling their position as counterculture, I would I perceive that as almost directly incorrect, because they're so like when you have people who literally telling you that it was the Ashkenazi Jews who designed the COVID virus to sort of slither around their own Ashkenazi DNA in order to hit everybody else and these sort of things. Like these kind of ideas are so outrageous. And I mean, you could also take climate denialism. Like if like I get it that you think that the counterculture will necessarily be the anti-patriarchal, and it's possible that you're right in some parts of society on that. But climate denialism, to stand on that today is a countercultural position. Like
But why do you say that if even today
because
I read
it,
that there's not the governments are not able to agree, like to do what is necessary in terms of
but they don't
policy change?
deny. But you don't have like even right wingers in at least my part of the world would not say go and say that climate change is not real. Like even the alt right in the political space in Scandinavia would not take that position. And
Okay, Scandinavia is different
okay,
than a lot of
but
other places.
maybe it's possible that some would. They used to do it. They used to do it. But today, when climate change is so visible for everybody, I don't think they can anymore.
My father
Uh,
is the climate change denial. For him, it doesn't exist. And I have other members of my family in
yeah,
Italy. So it's very widespread, the denial of climate change. I don't feel it's such a,
but is there
mainstream thing that everybody believes, and so you have to be not believe in it in order to be counterculture.
no?
I don't see
No,
that.
I'm not saying you have to believe in it to not be countercultural. I'm just saying taking that stance, you are doing a radical thing that will get you more opposition in at least the spaces where I move than and the also the like the political spaces that I have that I'm seeing, except of course Trump America, but that's also turning into a full blown fascism, and you have and that like a lot of these people used to identify with that too. They were like, yeah, Trump is kind of he's kind of cool. At least he's cooler than Kamala Harris, who's probably starting an idiotic war with Russia, whatever they were saying, you know. Um, so, so there even used to be an identification with that. You know?
So then it's also about how to be a real conscious, if if this word still has a meaning, um, rebel.
Yeah.
Because it's not just rebelling against whatever some of the people or some of the authorities are saying. Like, what are you really fighting
Mm.
for? What
Yeah.
is the real
Yeah.
need of society right now in
Mm-hmm.
order to even just survive at this point?
Yeah.
So there is a lot of this co-option of the rebel archetype. Everybody
Mm.
wants to be the rebel, but
Yeah.
then it's not just about being against.
No.
Then it's
No.
you're just a teenager.
Yeah. No, I totally think I totally think that everybody wants to be a rebel. I think that's exactly what it's about. Everybody wants to be a rebel, and if when the incredibly positive developments that wokeness have, if we can call it that for a moment, have implemented in our society, where, for instance, there is a much larger acceptance of queerness and transgender ways of being in the world than there used to be. Like uh, when that happens, then a lot of people are then just but nah, maybe you're also right that there is an aspect of that which is just patriarchalism, just like nah, I don't want to have the pronouns, you know, and yeah.
Yeah, patriarchy foster lack of emotional maturity. This, yes.
Yeah.
That's also why in Italy, with this right-wing government, they don't want to put relational education or emotional education in school, which is
Yeah.
absurd because then we
Mm,
have femicides and all of these guys freaking out because they're jealous or, and then they
mm,
become murderers.
mm,
So this patriarchy doesn't foster emotional maturity. This
mm,
we can
mm.
say.
I think, yeah, I think that Western culture in general has yeah, emotional maturity is a huge, like, if you look at the crisis of masculinity, you could basically see it as a kind of an exposure. You could probably see it as an exposure of an inherent lack of emotional maturity
Maturity.
in patriarchy
Yes.
that's kind of being opened for, and but this is then also why it's important to address it, because if not, we're just standing with an open wound and loads of dudes who end up becoming, I don't know, incel terrorists and these sort of things, or having insane ideas, or
Yeah, there's also
yeah.
Trump, Netanyahu, Putin, all of
Mhm.
them, they are clearly emotionally immature, but to a level that
Yeah, yeah,
they
yeah,
will never even be able to acknowledge because
yeah,
they cannot grasp it themselves.
yeah,
But
yeah,
anyway, we've gone
yeah.
a long way.
And we took a huge detour there, but that's okay. Um, let's end it here, Chiara, and thank you so much for just taking the time to chat with me and share a little bit about your incredibly interesting work. And let me just repeat: is it at Via where your courses can be found? And
Yes, at via.life.
at Via.life. And I'm totally hoping to see you around at some point somewhere, and we'll continue our discussions.
Let's go for
Cool.
it. Thank you, Rune. Bye bye, everyone.
Thanks. See you around.
Där bergast fyrir frälsing och ängan rättlátan skålset hälsing varje kur risar och trött vågnade stridsmän ganga och vötter varje kur risar och trött vågnade stridsmän ganga och vötter